In this video, I'll be replacing the gear oil on a Porsche 944 Transaxle, along with the axle flange seals, and briefly touching on the importance of CV axle maintenance. In addition to the recommended 60,000 mile maintenance interval for fluid replacement, other symptoms that it may be time to change your gear oil would include difficulty shifting gears, grinding or whining noises in the area of the transaxle, a low fluid level, dark or dirty colored oil, or the presence of fluid leaks. In order to change the transaxle fluid, you'll need some jack stands or ramps to raise the car, a 17mm hex bit for the drain and fill plugs, a drain pan, a fluid pump or a funnel and some hose, a torque wrench, and 3 quarts of gear oil. As far as the gear oil goes, you could probably spend the better part of a day sorting through the numerous arguments and opinions for and against the various options and brands available. And if you have a limited slip differential, you'll also have the added joy of factoring in a friction modifier to optimize the LSD clutch engagement. The factory workshop manual calls for use of an API class GL5 oil, but these are often avoided due to the corrosive effects they have on synchros made of brass and bronze. So for most of us, it's safe to select a high-grade GL4 oil with a weight of 75W80 or 75W90. Personally, I've found that the Redline products have a pretty robust following on enthusiast forums, and that's what I've been using recently. I currently have Redline MTL in the car, which is a 75W80 oil, and it was last replaced in April of 2019. I'm switching to the Redline MT90 variant, which is a 75W90 oil. The MT90 is just a bit thicker and has a higher temperature rating, so it would have the advantage in hotter climates or extremely spirited driving conditions, but is otherwise pretty similar in composition. I don't have a ton of mileage on the car since the last change, but the stuff that came out the first time was pretty foul and dirty, so I'm using that first change as kind of a cleaning now that it's been run through the gears a bit. To get started, the first thing we need to do is raise the car on jack stands or ramps. However you decide to lift the car, it's best for it to be raised evenly because the fluid level will be determined by the height of the fill plug on the transaxle. With the car properly raised, we can now take a look at some of the components of the system. On the left side of the transaxle case, you'll find the drain and fill plugs. If you find that these plugs are partially stripped or damaged, it's a good idea to go ahead and replace them, as they only cost about $5 a piece. On the left and right sides of the transaxle, you'll see the CV axle assemblies. The axles are connected to drive shafts on the wheel hub side and differential axle flanges on the transaxle side. This is a perfect time to inspect the transaxle for leaks, which can develop in a few different areas here. 2 of the most prominent ones are at the CV joint connection points. There are a couple of axle flange seals inside that wear out, and over time, gear oil seeps down and covers the flanges, the axle joint, and the sides of the transaxle case as the car is driven. The CV joint grease will also deteriorate as a result of aging, exposure to condensation, and separation of the oil and thickener. As it liquefies, it seeps out and collects at those same connection points on both sides of each of the axle assemblies. And after the car has sat for a few days, you may see some drops collecting here, and that's an indication that you should probably go ahead and replace the seals along with the axle grease. After an assessment of the needed maintenance, it's time to drain the gear oil. Using the 17mm hex bit and a breaker bar, the drain and fill plugs can be loosened and removed. The torque specification on the plugs is only 18 foot-pounds, but they are commonly over-torqued and can be fused in place from oxidation, so make sure that the tool is firmly and evenly applied during removal to avoid stripping the plugs. It's generally a best practice to remove the upper fill plug first, because if the lower drain plug is first removed only to find that the fill plug is stripped, you'll be left with an inoperable car and no way to refill the transaxle. As the plugs are being removed, be ready with the drain pan or receptacle to capture the old fluid. It may take a few minutes for the fluid to completely drain, and in the meantime, you can clean and inspect the drain plug. These plugs are often magnetized to collect any metal shavings from the wearing transmission components, and if a large amount of material has collected here and grinding or noise issues persist after changing the fluid, you'll likely have a larger issue that needs attention. Now that the gear oil has been drained, the drain plug can be replaced and torqued to 18 foot-pounds. The new gear oil can be added at this point if you're only performing the fluid change. However, in this case, I'll be replacing the axle flange seals as well, which requires the fluid to be drained from the transaxle. The seals here are usually referred to as differential output shaft seals or axle flange seals, and there are a number of different brands available for purchase. They typically cost anywhere from $5 to $25 a piece, and to access the seals, we'll need to disconnect the CV axle assemblies on the transaxle side by removing the 6 bolts and the 3 moon plates on each side. Depending on the hardware used on your car, you'll either have some 8mm 12-point bolts or some 6mm hex head bolts. Go ahead and remove the bolts with the appropriate tool, then disconnect and slide the axle out of the way. Next, you'll need to remove the 6mm hex bolt inside the axle flange. To do so, a screwdriver can be positioned in one of the flange's bolt holes and braced against the transaxle case for counter leverage. With the bolt removed, the axle flange will slide straight out of the transaxle. This is a good time to clean up the axle flange and inspect it for excessive wear or damage to the splines on the shaft. If the fluid leak was significant at this location, check the mating surface where the shaft spins inside the ring seal. If there's a deep groove here that catches on your fingernail, it's best to go ahead and replace the axle flange along with the output shaft seal. A seal puller or a screwdriver can be used to remove the seals. Just be careful not to scratch or damage the inside of the housing and work to ensure that all the pieces of the seal are completely removed. Once the area is all cleaned up, the new seal can be installed with a 40mm socket, a piece of similar diameter PVC pipe, or a roll of electrical tape. First, coat the seal with some assembly lube and then tap it into place with a rubber mallet. The seal should sit flush with the inner diameter or ridge inside the housing, and with the seals replaced, the axle flanges can be reinstalled and the bolt torqued to a value of 25 Newton meters or 18 foot-pounds. Now that the drain plug and axle flanges are back in place, the CV axle assemblies can be reconnected, but we'll touch on that more in a minute. For the time being, let's talk about adding the new gear oil to the transaxle. Go ahead and set up your fluid pump or funnel and route the hose into the transaxle fill hole. A longer length of hose can be routed over the exhaust and the left rear wheel, where a funnel can be attached from above. Alternatively, using a small funnel and hose, there is a cavity in front of the left axle where fluid containers can be poured in. The case will hold roughly 2.75 quarts of oil, but just keep filling it until the fluid level reaches the bottom of the fill hole. Then remove the hoses and install the fill plug by torquing it to 18 foot-pounds. The fluid plugs do have tapered threads, so it's normal for them to protrude slightly from the transaxle case when they're properly tightened. If you haven't done so already, at this point you can reconnect the CV axles to the axle flanges, but since you're here, it may be a good time to think about cleaning and rebuilding the CV joints as well. If a CV joint needs attention, you'll usually hear some clicking sounds in the area of the rear axles under normal driving conditions or from the outside wheel when turning the car. You may also notice the aforementioned leaks and a collection of grease outside the joints. Take a quick look inside the assemblies to assess the condition of the grease. Fresh CV joint grease will usually be a nice thick consistency, so if the grease is watery or if there's a lack of lubrication, it's probably time for replacement. In addition, it's good to inspect the rubber joint boots for cracks and replace them so that the joints are properly sealed from debris. 3-ounce pouches of CV joint grease can be purchased from local auto parts stores for around $5 a piece, and you'll need 1 pouch for each joint being serviced. If this service is neglected for too long, the joints can be damaged to the point where axle replacement may be needed. This job isn't super difficult to perform, but it can be quite messy, and to summarize it, you'll need to disconnect the axle assemblies from the wheel hub side, remove the axles from the car, remove the joint boots, disassemble and clean the joint parts, and reassemble them with new grease. When you're done and ready to install the axle assemblies, start with the wheel side first, followed by the transaxle side, and all of the bolts here will be torqued to 42 Newton meters or 31 foot-pounds. With the transaxle fluid replaced, you'll probably notice an improvement in the transmission shifting, as well as the noise level, especially when the transaxle is cold. And with the axle flange seals replaced, it'll ensure that the fluid in the transaxle remains at a stable level.